Thank you for watching. My name is Glenn Morgan, and this is We the Govern. And as I mentioned earlier, I like to occasionally do stories about the campaign finance complaints and ethics violations that I do catch people breaking the law, PACs, politicians, judges, and others in the Washington state. I've been doing this for years. It is a hobby of mine, but one thing I want to point out is that I have caught hundreds of these guys acting badly, behaving badly, breaking the law. And just in case you doubt that statement or think I'm exaggerating, you can go down to the link below, and I've detailed all the original source documents for hundreds and hundreds of these politicians, PACs, and judges and others who I have caught breaking the law over the years and who have been sanctioned or fined or even litigated against for their violations. Because, after all, everybody needs a hobby, and my hobby is actually filing these complaints and getting these people in trouble because it doesn't look like anybody else is going to bother doing it. I do like to have other people do it, and if you're willing to imitate what I'm doing and try to do the same thing, I'd love it if you did. I put on training classes to help people do this, but you're welcome to do it. And if you are interested in doing that, I do recommend that you go to the Public Disclosure Commission, pdc.wa.gov. It's actually a great reference site. I do link to it down below as well, but if you want to know anything about campaign finance laws in Washington state, and more importantly, who's funding those politicians and those PACs, how they're spending their money, their financial affairs documents, lobbyists, all kinds of information, you're going to find it here. Now, I know government is basically reducing transparency almost everywhere we turn, but this happens to be an area, at least in Washington state, where transparency is generally still, it actually exists, and it's a great resource for anybody who wants to dig into more about what's going on. There's a lot of hidden gems and information at this website. And every complaint that I have filed, for the most part, has a lot to do with information that I have been able to find and reference on this site. So if you're interested in doing the same thing I'm doing, you're going to have to be more familiar with that site. So let's start with Thurston County. Thurston County happens to be where I live, and as I go through this list, I'm going to be bouncing all over the place. Thurston County, located sort of in the central part of Washington, western Washington, and it happens to be one of the two hearts of darkness in Washington state. The state capital is located here in Olympia, and of course, this is where most bad ideas start, and the government tends to legislature likes to get together and find ways to take away your freedom and your money. That's mostly what they spend their time doing, along with all the bureaucracies that are located here. The other heart of darkness, of course, is Seattle, where it's currently imploding under progressive leadership. So one of the videos that I did recently was about one of these complaints, and I just wanted to catch up on this because as a violator of the week, this one certainly merits discussion because Stephen Drew, who happens to be the incumbent assessor in Thurston County, was definitely caught breaking the law. And interestingly enough, this is not a common complaint. The complaint that I had filed against him here actually had to do with him illegally soliciting and threatening employees to give him campaign finance contributions to his political campaign. He's currently running for office against somebody's running against him, and that is not a common violation. In fact, even though it's been common for him to commit that law, to violate that law, and he has been fined for it in the past. In fact, he was fined in 2012 when the Thurston County Human Resources Department had to file a complaint against him on behalf of 4 employees who worked there for this violation, and he had to pay a fine at that time, and it looks like he's just continuing that behavior today. So this is, other than this guy, though, I don't usually find too many people breaking the law, and so this has been an interesting complaint to file, and it's also close to home. I will point out that the Olympian actually did cover this a little bit, mainly just to say that he's denying that he broke the law, which is sort of funny because one of the things that this journalist has forgotten to do is actually go bother to even read the complaint and identify the fact that Stephen Drew's already broken this law before and has admitted to breaking the law in the past when he had to pay a fine to the PDC a few years ago. So it's no surprise that he's continuing to break the law after all. The fine was small and the consequences seem low. But I will point out that although he pretends that he did not break the law, he is, by all accounts, starting to write checks back to the employees who are filing these complaints and annoyed and frustrated that he's actually threatening them. That's a good start. And sometimes the best thing to do when you're caught is to at least make amends. And it looks like he's trying to send that cash back to those employees who were forced to give it to him in the first place. Great place to start. We'll see what happens. But the other part of this complaint I do want to point out that's kind of interesting is he is the only one that I'm going to talk about here who so far has really responded in a kind of a thorough way, trying to deny that he committed the violations. And one of the things he says he didn't violate was he had sent out this mailer and spent an extra $27,000 to send this mailer out to all these people in Thurston County, which was really a self-promotion piece during an election cycle. And that is illegal to do that. Now, he claims, though, the reason why he did it because it's an emergency, because some guns have been pulled on some of his appraisers in the past. Now that's true, that had happened, but it was years ago, and he didn't think it was that much of an emergency then. He just decided to wait a few years and do it now, conveniently during an election cycle, not when it actually was an emergency. So again, his response was pretty bad, but this is the Public Disclosure Commission, and he is a politically connected insider, so we'll see how the PDC treats him and whether they just decide to give him a free pass for breaking the law. You never know until you file a complaint. So going on to another part of Washington State, heading a little bit further down south on I-5, going to Clark County, which is located just across the river from Portland, Oregon. And there I actually filed a complaint against the Thurston County Auditor, Greg Kimsey. Now, Kimsey was originally, I think, elected decades ago as a Republican, and he's kind of become fossilized in office in this position he's been there a long time. Right now, he's a nonpartisan position because Clark County made a transition a few years ago to this charter county operation. So technically, this is a nonpartisan position. But what I did find, disturbingly, is that one of his biggest contributions during his political campaign a few years ago to the campaign he's in right now was actually a transfer from his surplus account. It was about a $7,000 amount that was sent to his, at least according to the way he reported to the PDC. However, when you actually look at a surplus account, it doesn't look like that money ever went there. At least there's no equivalent report that was made from that account during that time. So this is disturbing, especially since this guy is the auditor and supposedly in charge of elections, or at least he theoretically knows what he's doing in that area. And if he can't figure out how to run his own campaign finance reporting, then exactly what the heck is he doing with the elections? Inquiring minds would like to know, and that's why I filed the complaint with the PDC, and I'm really curious to see what his answer or excuse is for this violation. Heading back to another part of Washington State, all the way across to the eastern side, we're going to Spokane, Washington. So Spokane County, where there happens to be some interesting races going on, and one of the candidates I found that did break the law is a candidate. Now, this is actually for the county county commission. Spokane County is actually one of the commission counties, the largest one in the state. And what they're doing is they're changing it from 3 commissioners to 5 commissioners, and that was approved. And so because of that, there's a bunch of political races that are going on in Spokane County right now. One of those candidates is Maggie Yates, and so she's one of the candidates running for one of these positions, and it's a pretty big shakeup in Spokane County and a very important race. She's a political insider, good friends with Inslee, like many of the Democrats in Spokane are. City of Spokane is essentially kind of the like a couple of the other cities in eastern Washington, these are kind of enclaves of progressive sort of leftist holdings, and Spokane in the 3rd district is really the only Democrat only district east of the Cascades that sends any Democrats to Olympia. So this is a big race, and people do pay attention to it, even on the west side, even Governor Inslee. However, the real story here as to why and how she broke the law has more to do with her treasurer, this guy named Brian McClatchy. Now, he's supposedly a volunteer treasurer who jumped in. I've never seen him do treasurer work before. He is an attorney, but he decided that it would be a good idea as her volunteer treasurer to just falsify some reports. And I'll get into some of the details on that, but it's kind of important to know who this guy is, because his law-breaking is relatively significant because he's also married to Lisa Brown, who was recently appointed by Governor Inslee to be the director of Washington State Department of Commerce after she had failed in her effort to run for Congress against the local incumbent Republican out there. So she lost that race. She'd been in the state legislature before. This is her husband, who likes to falsify documents, apparently, in campaign finance when he's actually the treasurer. Now, he's been in the news before for doing things like going on Wikipedia and basically deleting sections of his wife's Wikipedia page, trying to pretend like they're inaccurate. Now, what was funny about this one was just from a couple years ago, was that he actually gets in there and makes that change. And his claim was that even though, yes, she did indeed vote for the big tax hike that they referenced in the Wikipedia page accurately, he's pretending that it wasn't actually the biggest tax hike in state history. It was just close to the biggest tax hike in state history. And I don't even know why that's a problem. There are Democrats, and Democrats always vote for tax hikes. But let's talk about what Brian did and how that violation is significant in the case of the Maggie Yates campaign. And one of the things that you have to do, and this is his violation, this is the one I filed, and he basically falsified disclosure contributor employer occupation information on the financial C3 reports, which are the reports that talk about who the people are that contribute money. And this is actually similar to even the federal level. The reason why campaign finance laws require you to identify employer when you, in Washington State, when you basically contribute more than $100, it has to be $100.01. Any contribution above that, they have you identify your employer because they want to see if companies are using a bunch of employees to donate a bunch of money to influence an election. At least they could document it if they record who the employers are. So it's a fairly common thing to track. What's funny about it is that if there's a mistake made in that and you file a complaint against a campaign who's done it clearly wrong, the treasurer will always say, well, how would I know? Because after all, these people just gave me wrong information and I just wrote down what they said and I don't have the ability to go back and check it. That's been accepted as a legitimate defense at the Public Disclosure Commission. However, there's one person on the planet who cannot make that excuse, and that's the treasurer himself. And Brian McClatchy is the treasurer here. He gave this campaign $2,000 in kind and cash contributions, and then he claimed that he wasn't employed. Now, he's literally the only guy that can make this violation. He did it. He falsified it. He knows that's not true because, after all, he was employed by the city of Spokane as an attorney, or, according to his bar association report, he's actually was employed by a California tribal law firm up there as well. So one or the other. He was never not employed, but he identified himself as not employed. That's false information. He falsified it. He knowingly falsified it because, after all, it's about him, and he's literally the only guy that he could that could make a completely false statement in the PDC at the time. I will point out at the same time he was making contributions to other people, and they were correctly identifying who he worked for, and he just didn't for himself. He's literally the only guy that falsified the documents as it applied to his own campaign finance contributions. It was a strange complaint. Plus, he had some problems with in-kind contributions I won't get into here, but you can read this complaint and study it for yourself. So this guy's done a really good job of putting Maggie Yates in the spotlight for the PDC just because he can't seem to follow the law. So let's go to another corner of Washington State, back up on the Canadian border to Whatcom County, and found a number of violations up there. And I'm sure these aren't the only ones, but it was not a hard one to find some violations. And I've done reports before, and frequently Whatcom County folk do seem to feature prominently. But in this case, I'm really just talking about two different PACs. Fuse PAC, which I've caught breaking the law many times in the past, and also New Direction PAC. New Direction PAC is kind of the multi-million-dollar mega PAC this cycle that's dumping millions of dollars into all kinds of campaigns all over Washington State, mostly funded by SEIU and other public sector unions, with a bit of cash sent to them from big dollar donors in the Democrat Party. Fuse Washington, or Fuse Votes PAC, that's generally a Nick Hanauer group that he's the billionaire out of Seattle that funds it, and they regularly break the law all the time. But the two of them, in this case, what they did when you actually look at the complaints is they failed to, when they filed their independent expenditure, which they're spending tens of thousands of dollars in races in North Whatcom where the Republicans look like they're doing very well. Most of these are attack ads, and what they did is when they file them, you're supposed to identify who you're spending the money on, and instead they misfiled them and put them in different campaigns. So they identified the wrong candidate that they filed all this money, and now Fuse had a smaller amount, and New Direction PAC had really large sums that they had misfiled these documents. Interestingly enough, New Direction PAC did get back and admit that they committed this violation. They admitted that it was correct. So I'll be curious to see if the PDC actually enforces the law or does anything with them. So that's just kind of my tour of Washington State, just recent violations. It's campaign season, so there's a lot of violations to find. It's just a matter of spending a little bit of time there. I have others that I just haven't had a chance to catch up on or report on or even file a complaint on yet. But when I have time, while I'm driving around the state and I stop at a coffee shop, I'll make sure I do that. If you want to do it as well, please start paying attention to what's happening at the PDC website, pdc.wa.gov. It's a great resource, and there's a lot you can learn when you go there. Look at the enforcement pages if you want to learn more. Now, before I close out this video, I do want to talk about one thing. People have asked me this before. What's your favorite complaint? What's your most favorite complaint that you filed? And actually, depending on when you've asked me that, I've probably given different answers. In the past, sometimes it's been the Spokane County Democrats. So they were fined over $80,000 for just egregious violations they committed in the past. Sometimes it's been my complaint that I had filed against the Pacific County Democrats or Island County Democrats or even the Thurston County Democrats. There's plenty of violations to find out there. Even the complaint that I had against Inslee, where he was recently sanctioned by the PDC. But actually, my favorite complaint right now, when I look back on it over the last couple of years, is a complaint that I filed of all things against the Washington Society of Certified Public Accountants, PAC. And this was a couple years ago, and I caught them breaking the law just like I catch so many others. And what just amused me about this a little bit is that here these guys are supposed to be certified public accountants, and they're supposed to be able to follow the law and file your taxes and do this stuff. And they were egregiously out of line and not even coming close to complying with campaign finance laws. And so they were found guilty in this case of these violations. They actually paid a $2,500 fine, which I know doesn't sound like much, but it's still something. And it was just, I was more amused by this because, after all, if the certified public accountants can't figure out how to comply with the campaign finance laws, how can anybody else? And that was part of the questions that I had back in 2017 and 18 when I was really starting out down this road. But it was a funny complaint to file. They paid a fine, and I'm sure that they're doing a little bit better job now when they go to file their campaign finance documents moving forward. So that was my favorite complaint at this point in time. And again, this is just my section of Violators of the Week. There are always more to discover. If you just bother to look, you will find them. And that's what I encourage everybody to do. If you want to learn more, please go to wethegovern.com. You can read more down below. And I do link a page, direct link, just to make it easy for you, so you can read all the complaints that I have, all the people that have been sanctioned or fined by the complaints that I filed just in the last few years. It's easy to find down there, and it's a little wonkish reading, but if you're interested, it's there. But if you want to do the same thing, learn how to go to the pdc.wa.gov. It's a great website, and look at some of the complaints I filed and use them as templates if you want. And the only way that you can make a difference or an impact in this area, if you choose to do so, is to show up. You got to start somewhere, and maybe using some of these complaints as a template would be a good place to start. Because I always say, the future belongs to those who show up, and you need to show up to make a difference.